Have you ever noticed something strange about certain breakups? A woman leaves. She moves on. She tells herself she's done for good. Maybe she starts dating someone else. Maybe she builds an entirely new life. And yet months later, sometimes even years later, one man still lingers in her mind. Not the richest man she dated, not the most handsome, not even the man who loved her the hardest. The one she can't quite forget is usually the man who never made her the center of his universe. Most men spend years believing that women regret losing status, money, attention, or comfort. That's why so many men panic after a breakup. They try to prove their value. They try to show what she lost. But female psychology doesn't work the way most men think it does. The men women regret losing usually possess one trait that becomes painfully obvious only after they're gone. A trait that creates attraction, respect, emotional safety, and something even more powerful: lasting impact. And if you understand this trait, you'll quickly recognize whether you're building it or unknowingly pushing it away. Before we go any further, I want you to think about your own experience. Have you ever had a woman come back after walking away? Or have you watched another man become unforgettable while others were forgotten almost instantly? Write "come back" in the comments if you've experienced it yourself, because once you understand what women truly regret losing, you'll start seeing relationships very differently. One of the biggest mistakes men make after a breakup is assuming they already know why a woman comes back. They tell themselves she got lonely. They tell themselves the new guy disappointed her. They tell themselves life humbled her and now she's looking for a second chance. Sometimes those things are true, but they don't explain the entire story. Because if loneliness alone brought women back, they would return to every man who treated them well. If disappointment alone was the answer, every failed rebound relationship would lead straight back to an ex. Yet that's not what happens. What actually happens is far more revealing. A woman can leave one man and never think about him again. Then she can leave another man and spend months comparing every new relationship to what she had before. Same woman, different outcome. Why? Because women do not remember men based solely on what those men gave them. They remember men based on how those men made them feel about life, about themselves, and about the future. This is where most men miss the point. When a relationship ends, they focus on what they lost. Women often focus on what disappeared. The difference matters. A man who made a woman his entire world may seem devoted while the relationship lasts, but once he's gone, there is very little mystery left behind. She already saw everything. His attention, his energy, his purpose, his emotional stability, everything revolved around her. There was nothing larger than the relationship itself, but every so often, a woman encounters a man whose life cannot be reduced to the relationship. A man who loved deeply but still had somewhere to go. A man who cared but was never consumed. A man whose future continued moving forward, whether she stood beside him or not. Those are the men women often struggle to forget, because when a relationship ends with that kind of man, she doesn't simply lose a boyfriend. She loses access to a certain energy. She loses access to a certain direction. And years later, she may still wonder what happened to the man who kept walking while everyone else stopped. That is where our conversation truly begins. After a breakup, most men fall into one of two traps. The first trap is obvious. He chases. He sends the long message, then another one, then one more explaining what he really meant. He apologizes for things that weren't even his fault. He promises to change. He tries to remind her of the good memories. He searches for the perfect words that will make her reconsider. From his perspective, he's fighting for love. From her perspective, something very different is happening. Every message carries an unspoken confession. My emotional stability depends on your decision. And that is rarely attractive. The second trap looks completely different on the surface. This man doesn't chase. He collapses. His motivation disappears. His routines disappear. His goals disappear. He stops taking care of himself. Friends notice he's different. Work suffers. His energy fades. To outsiders, these two men appear completely opposite. One is pursuing, the other is withdrawing. Yet female psychology often reads both situations the same way. Both men are communicating that their lives were built around the relationship. That realization creates pressure most women never openly talk about. You see, many men believe women want to be the center of a man's universe. Some women may enjoy the attention temporarily. Very few truly respect it. Because the moment a woman realizes she has become your entire emotional foundation, she also realizes that every disagreement carries enormous weight. Every mood shift affects your day. Every conflict becomes a crisis. Every moment of distance feels threatening. And suddenly the relationship stops feeling like a partnership. It starts feeling like a responsibility. Imagine carrying the burden of knowing another adult's sense of worth rises and falls based on your approval. At first, it may feel flattering. Eventually, it becomes exhausting. This is why desperation often produces the exact opposite result men are hoping for. The more you try to convince her not to leave, the more clearly she sees that you have nowhere else to stand. And women notice that far faster than men realize. Here's the uncomfortable truth. No woman wants to feel like she's dating a man whose entire identity can be destroyed by a breakup. Not because she's cruel, not because she lacks empathy, but because deep down, women are drawn towards strength, direction, and emotional grounding. A relationship should add to your life. The moment it becomes your life, attraction begins quietly slipping away. The men women remember most are not the ones who fought hardest to keep them. They're often the ones who never stopped fighting for themselves. What separates the men women regret losing from the men they quickly move on from is usually not confidence. It's not charisma. It's not money. And it's certainly not some collection of dating tricks. The trait is purpose. Now, before you dismiss that word because you've heard it 1,000 times before, stay with me. Most men misunderstand what purpose actually means. Purpose is not posting motivational quotes online. It is not pretending to be busy. It is not bragging about future plans that never become reality. Purpose is much simpler than that. It is knowing what you're building and continuing to build it whether anyone is watching or not. A man with purpose has a direction that existed before the relationship and will continue after the relationship. And women notice this far more than men realize. The first thing they notice is that he doesn't constantly seek reassurance. He doesn't need daily confirmation that he's loved. He doesn't panic every time communication changes. He isn't asking himself every hour whether she's losing interest. Why? Because his identity doesn't live inside the relationship. He knows who he is outside of it. That creates a quiet confidence many women find incredibly attractive. Not loud confidence, not arrogant confidence, stable confidence. The second thing women notice is that he has standards. A man who knows where he's going becomes very careful about what he allows into his life. He doesn't tolerate behavior that constantly disrupts his peace. He doesn't abandon his values to avoid conflict. And perhaps most importantly, he doesn't negotiate away his self-respect in exchange for affection. Women may not always agree with his boundaries, but they almost always notice them. The third thing women notice is the absence of desperation. A purposeful man is not available every second of every day because he has a life he's actively building. His attention has value because it is not unlimited. When he's present, he's genuinely present. When he's working, he's working. When he's growing, he's growing. There is structure behind his actions. That structure creates respect. Then comes the fourth thing, progress. This may be the most important of all. A purposeful man is rarely standing still. His body improves. His skills improve. His thinking evolves. His discipline strengthens. His life has movement, and movement is powerful. Because women are naturally paying attention not only to where a man is today, but also to where he's likely to be tomorrow. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of female psychology. Many men focus entirely on current value. Women often evaluate future potential alongside current reality. They are watching the trajectory. They are watching the direction. They are watching the pattern. And a man moving steadily towards something meaningful creates a feeling that is difficult to replace. Here's a truth many women never say out loud. Women don't just notice who you are. They notice where you're going. That is why a man with purpose leaves such a lasting impression. His attraction is not built solely on what he possesses today. It is built on the sense that his life is expanding, that tomorrow will be bigger than yesterday, that there is always another horizon ahead of him. And once a woman experiences that energy, the absence of it becomes impossible not to notice, which brings us to the opposite type of man. The one who unintentionally destroys attraction by making a relationship his entire reason for existing. Many men have been taught a dangerous idea. They've been told that the ultimate proof of love is making a woman the center of everything. Put her first. Think about her constantly. Prioritize her above your goals. Prioritize her above your growth. Prioritize her above yourself. On the surface, it sounds romantic. In reality, it often creates the exact conditions that slowly kill attraction. Because there is a massive difference between valuing a woman and depending on her. A man who values a woman chooses her. A man who depends on a woman needs her. Female psychology responds very differently to those two energies. When a man becomes emotionally dependent, subtle changes begin to appear. He starts monitoring her mood. If she's happy, he feels secure. If she's distant, he feels anxious. If she takes longer to reply, he struggles to focus. Without realizing it, he hands control of his emotional state to someone else. The relationship stops being part of his life. It becomes the operating system of his life. And women can feel that. Most won't describe it in those exact words. Many won't even consciously understand why their attraction is fading. They'll simply feel heavier around him, less excited, less inspired, less drawn toward him. Imagine a man waking up every morning and checking his phone before his feet touch the floor, not because he has business to run, not because he has responsibilities to manage, but because his entire emotional state depends on whether one woman responded to a message. Her silence determines his confidence. Her attention determines his mood. Her approval determines his self-worth. That is not love. That is emotional dependence wearing the disguise of love. And eventually, women begin to feel trapped by it. Here's something many men never hear. When a woman senses that she has become the sole source of your happiness, she also realizes she has become responsible for maintaining it. That's a burden, not a privilege. A burden. Nobody wants to carry another person's entire emotional existence. Over time, that pressure quietly transforms attraction into obligation. Respect begins to erode, excitement begins to disappear, and the relationship slowly loses its vitality. This is why some men become confused when they hear phrases like, "I need space," "I don't know what changed," "I feel overwhelmed." What changed was not necessarily her feelings. What changed was the emotional weight she was carrying. The tragedy is that many of these men genuinely loved their partners. Their mistake wasn't loving too little. Their mistake was abandoning themselves in the process. A woman wants to be important in your life. She does not want to become your life. Read that again, because it explains countless breakups. A man who cannot stand firmly on his own eventually struggles to become someone others can lean on. And that reality leads directly to the trait women often miss while they have it and desperately note this after it's gone. Something interesting happens after many breakups. A woman enters a new relationship expecting to find the same feelings she had before. At first, everything looks promising. The attention is there, the chemistry is there, the excitement is there. But as time passes, she starts noticing something missing. Not excitement, not passion, not confidence, stability. This is where many men completely misunderstand female psychology. Men often assume women regret losing the most attractive man, the wealthiest man, or the most confident man. Those qualities matter, but they are not always what women miss the most. What women frequently miss is the feeling of emotional safety that comes from being around a man whose life remains steady regardless of circumstances. A man with purpose rarely falls apart every time life becomes difficult. When conflict happens, he doesn't instantly panic. When disagreement happens, he doesn't immediately surrender his principles. When challenges appear, he doesn't lose his identity. He remains grounded, and grounding creates trust. Think about how rare that has become. Many people today are controlled by every emotion they feel. Every disappointment becomes a crisis. Every setback becomes a catastrophe. Every argument becomes a threat to the entire relationship. A purposeful man operates differently. He can experience frustration without becoming destructive. He can experience uncertainty without becoming desperate. He can experience conflict without becoming unstable. That doesn't mean he's emotionless. It means his emotions are not driving the vehicle. His direction is. Imagine a couple having a serious disagreement. One man spends the entire night spiraling. He sends emotional messages. He demands reassurance. He creates more chaos than the original argument. Another man goes for a workout, clears his head, focuses on his responsibilities, and returns to the conversation calm enough to solve the problem. Which man creates safety? Which man creates trust? Which man is more likely to be respected? The answer is obvious. Yet many women don't fully appreciate that difference until they've lost it. While they're in the relationship, stability can appear ordinary, predictable, expected. Then the relationship ends. They meet other men. Men who are reactive, men who are inconsistent, men who need constant validation, men whose emotional state changes every hour, and suddenly they understand what they once had. Here's a truth that many women quietly discover too late. Sometimes they don't miss the man himself first. They miss the peace they felt around him. They miss the certainty. They miss the emotional strength. They miss the feeling of being with someone whose life wasn't constantly falling apart. And once that realization arrives, the memory of that man becomes very difficult to replace. At this point, some men hear everything we've discussed and immediately ask the wrong question. They ask, how do I become the kind of man she comes back to? That's the wrong target. The goal is not becoming unforgettable to her. The goal is becoming so grounded in your own direction that whether she comes back or not stops determining your future. Ironically, that is exactly what creates the trait women respect most. It starts with a simple question. What are you building? Not what sounds impressive, not what your family expects, not what social media rewards. What are you genuinely building? A business, a career transition, a healthier body, a skill that creates opportunities? A creative project you've been avoiding for years? The specific answer matters less than the fact that you have one. Most men drift through life without a clear destination. Purpose begins the moment drifting ends. Once you identify what you're building, the next challenge is protecting it. Because purpose without action is fantasy. Look honestly at your week. How much time disappears into distractions? How much energy is spent consuming instead of creating? How many hours are invested in things that move your future forward? The men women admire are rarely magical. They are simply consistent. They keep showing up for the life they're creating. Another shift must happen as well. Stop making women the primary goal. I know that sounds strange in a conversation about relationships, but listen carefully. The moment your entire self-worth depends on female approval, you become vulnerable to every emotional fluctuation around you. Neediness begins. Overthinking begins. Dependence begins. Growth changes that dynamic. When your focus expands beyond getting validation, your energy changes. You stop chasing. You stop performing. You stop negotiating your value. And finally build a life that can stand on its own feet. A life supported by discipline, by meaningful work, by physical health, by strong friendships, by continuous growth. When those foundations exist, relationships become healthier because they are no longer carrying responsibilities they were never meant to carry. A woman becomes an addition to your life, not the structure holding it together. That distinction changes everything, because the men women remember for years are rarely the men who needed them most. They're the men who had somewhere meaningful to go. They're the men who kept growing. They're the men whose lives continued expanding long after the relationship ended. And that is the difference between being temporarily desired and being genuinely unforgettable. Let's go back to the question we started with. Why do some women leave and never look back, while others spend months or even years thinking about a man they once walked away from? The answer is usually much simpler than people think. It isn't because he was perfect. It isn't because he was the most attractive man she ever met. It isn't because he said all the right things or knew some secret formula for keeping her interested. The men women regret losing usually possess something much deeper. They have direction, they have purpose, they have an identity that exists independently of the relationship. While many men build their lives around a woman, these men build a life that a woman can become part of. And female psychology responds powerfully to that difference. A woman may not fully appreciate it while she's experiencing it. In fact, she may even take it for granted. But after the relationship ends, reality starts teaching lessons that emotions often hide. She meets men who lack discipline, men who lack stability, men who lack direction. And that's when comparison quietly begins. That's when she remembers the man whose world didn't collapse when life became difficult. The man who kept moving forward. The man who knew who he was before she arrived and still knew who he was after she left. So here's the question I want you to leave with today. If the relationship ended tomorrow, what would still remain? What are you building that is bigger than your need for approval? What mission would continue pulling you forward? Your answer to that question may determine not only how women see you, but how you see yourself. If this message resonated with you, share your biggest takeaway in the comments. Subscribe if you're ready to understand female psychology on a deeper level and build the kind of value that cannot be taken away, and share this with a man who needs the reminder. Women who leave often remember the man who never abandoned his purpose.